Hi guys, welcome to World History. Today we're going to talk about le philosophe. And just in case you don't know anything about French, because even though there's an S here, it's silent. If there were an E here after the S, it would say le philosophes, but there's no E, so it's le philosophe. Le means the. So this is the philosophers. But it's always said in French. We don't say the philosophers, we say le philosophe. Of the 1700s, these are Enlightenment thinkers. Enlightenment thinkers. The four big Enlightenment thinkers we're going to talk about are Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot, and Rousseau. You need to know these names. I can't make that clear enough for you. You need to know these names. Montesquieu, Voltaire, Diderot, Rousseau. Really important Enlightenment thinkers. Also, little sidebar, these four names are not only important for this class right now. I promise you, you're going to hear these names for the rest of your life. When you get to university, people are going to talk to you about Voltaire and Diderot. If you go on to your master's degree in something, they're going to talk to you about these guys. Self-admittedly, I am a nerd and I hang out with nerds, but I hear these names a lot just in regular everyday conversations with my friends. It's not just Mrs. Given's world history class at AIS. You really need to know these names for your life. So first, let's talk about Montesquieu. Montesquieu was really interested in how government works. How government works. And he studied world governments from all over the world. He studied how governments work all over Europe. He studied how governments work in the Americas. He studied Native American governments. He studied government all over Asia. And he wrote this book in 1748. He wrote a book called The Spirit of the Laws. The Spirit of the Laws. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws. And in his book, he talked about what makes a good government, what makes a bad government, what should we do to make our government better. And one thing, an important thing that Montesquieu said was a government should have the separation of powers. What does that mean, Mrs. Givens? Thank you for asking. Separation of powers means breaking up the government into three different parts. And he said we should have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial parts. What does that mean? Okay, so let's break it up into the school. This is Almaty International School. And we've got our director is Dr. Craig. And then under Dr. Craig, there are some assistant directors. Assistant director. To be completely honest with you, I'm sorry, like I'm really new here, but I think we only have two, and that is Mrs. Schofield and Mrs. Naro. And then under the two of them, there are other, I don't know, school type, there are other school leaders, like people that work in the office. Now, let's say Dr. Craig is the legislative branch. The assistant directors are the executive branch, and the other random school leaders are the judicial branch. So Dr. Craig decides he wants to make some change in the school. It sounds like a fantastic idea to him. But with a separation of powers, he's not allowed to just make a change because he wants to. He has to talk to both the other parts of the government, and he has to get their permission. If only the assistant directors approve, but the school leaders don't, then Dr. Craig doesn't get to do his thing. Everybody has to agree. And it's the same thing for any change, any law, any rule made at all. All three departments of the government have to agree before the change is made. So no one branch of the government has total control. They all have to work together. That was Montesquieu's big addition to Enlightenment thinking, was the separation of powers. Montesquieu wrote The Spirit of the Laws. In The Spirit of the Laws, he talked about the separation of powers. Now, let's talk about, oh yeah, Francois Marie Arouet. Francois Marie Arouet went by the name Voltaire. This is a name he chose for himself. Voltaire is all you need to know. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I only said Francois Marie Arouet to scare you because I know how much 16-year-old kids love learning names. His name that his parents gave him was Francois Marie Arouet. You do not have to remember that. Forget it. Throw it. Actually, before I say forget it, I happen to really like trivia, and I play trivia games a lot, and I go to like pubs where they have trivia night. And you might be surprised how often this name comes up in trivia. And if you know, like they'll say, Francois Marie Arouet was famous for, and if you know that that's Voltaire, it'd be awesome. But I do promise you that for this world history class, I'm not gonna ask you that name ever again. You need to know Voltaire. This is how everyone knows the dude. His name is Voltaire. So Voltaire wrote, or his thing was, my trade, that means his job, my trade is to say what I think. Now that sounds doesn't really sound like a big thing, except this was the 1700s France, where people did not have freedom of speech. Voltaire supported freedom of speech. This is a time when if you spoke bad of the king, you could be killed. If you spoke bad of your boss, you could be put in prison. There are still countries today where you don't have freedom of speech. But Voltaire was fighting really, really hard for it. And Voltaire openly said what he thought about bad leaders, about bad rich people. Voltaire thought that if you were very, very rich, you should be using your money and using your power to help people. And if you were not using your money and using your power to help people, then he thought you were a bad person, and he would just openly say it. He would openly say it, he would write about it, he would openly write like their names. Like, let's say I thought Dr. Craig, who is, if you're new to this school, Dr. Craig is the director of the school. If I were Voltaire and I thought Dr. Craig was a horrible, horrible school director, then I would like openly go on TikTok and say really, really terrible things about my boss. That's what Voltaire did. He went out and openly spoke about these, and they were horrible people, these horrible people doing horrible things, but no one else would do that because they were all afraid. And Voltaire was a big, big fan of freedom of speech. Freedom of speech, Voltaire. That's what you need to remember about Voltaire, freedom of speech. Now, let's talk about Diderot. Once again, this is French, so the I says E, it's Diderot, it's pronounced like Diderot. But I'm going to erase that because it looks silly. But that's how it's pronounced, Diderot. So, Diderot, he took all the writings of the really great Enlightenment thinkers. He took their writings, he took some of their books, he took some of their pamphlets. A pamphlet is like a thin, like few pages, little booklet. And he read them all, and he took the best of everything and put it all together in I believe it was 28, yeah. He made a 28 volume set. That means like Harry Potter is a 7-volume set. Diderot made a 28-volume set of Enlightenment thinker books, and he called it the Encyclopedia. The Encyclopedia. Diderot put together the Encyclopedia. And now remember, Diderot didn't write the Encyclopedia. He put together lots and lots and lots of incredible works of Enlightenment thinkers from all over, and they put them all together in a 28-volume set called the Encyclopedia. Now, let me tell you something kind of funny. The church And this is the Catholic Church, because we're talking about France. And at this time, if you were in France, you were Catholic. So the Catholic Church and the government, these folks, they didn't like the Enlightenment thinkers very much, because the Enlightenment thinkers were saying the government is horrible, they're not helping the people, the government should be helping the people, and they're just helping themselves. The church should be helping the people, they're just helping themselves. And the Enlightenment thinkers were saying things should be shaken up a bit. But the church and the government liked things how they were. I mean, if you were a powerful, rich king, and someone was coming along telling you that you were doing a bad job and the government should change, what would you think about that? Right. So they didn't like it. So what did they do? They banned the encyclopedia. But let's talk for a second. I'm talking to the 16-year-old child in you. I know not all of you are exactly 16, but I'm just saying most of you are about 16. If your parents tell you you can't do something or you can't go somewhere, what do you want to do? You want to do that thing and you want to go to that place, right? Because, like, what if you saw your mom's friend sitting and reading a book, and when you walked up, she closed that book and hid it from you, and you were like, what's that? And she said, oh, it's not for kids, you can't read this. But what do you want to do? You want to sneak around when nobody's looking and you want to read that book. Because that's what we do. That's what humans do. If someone says, you can't have that, we want it. It makes us want it even more. Think about little kids. Do any of you have a sibling that has some toy that they don't ever play with? The kid never plays with that toy. But as soon as some other kid comes up and grabs it and wants to play with it, instantly that kid wants it back. Because that's our nature. When we're told you can't do something, you can't have something, we want it. So what happened was the church actually had these big parties. They had big book burnings. And they would take Enlightenment thinker works and they would throw them in fires and burn them. And they banned them. But what happened was the encyclopedia became a bestseller. Everybody wanted the encyclopedia. Now, you have to remember that at the 1700s, during the 1700s, most people couldn't read. So when I say everybody, I mean everybody that could read. But like, people really, 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 really wanted the encyclopedia. It became famous all over Europe. It went all the way across the ocean to the colonies in the Americas. Everybody wanted to get their hands on the encyclopedia. Everybody wanted to read it. And that's how Enlightenment ideas really spread. Was the church and the government were trying to stop these ideas by banning the books and burning the books, but all they really did was get people more excited about it and make more and more people read Enlightenment ideas. So that's kind of funny. Now, Rousseau. Rousseau. In French, E-A-U says O, Rousseau. So Rousseau said, people are good, which I also personally believe. I'm very much an Enlightenment thinker myself. Rousseau said that people's natural state, which is good, people's natural state was destroyed by society, because society pushed people into ways that weren't natural for them. And when some people are really, really rich and have everything, and other people are really, really poor and have nothing, when the poor people look at the rich people, it makes them sad and it makes them do bad things. Like crime. I don't know, I mean, why does most crime happen? People, it's not like a bad person just says, I'm gonna go out and steal today. Most crime is because people are poor. Like, they're not, rich people aren't going out and stealing from other rich people. Poor people are stealing so they can survive. And when they see rich people with everything, it makes them so angry. So their natural state, people's natural state is good and happy. And this, like, structures of society turn people bad. Now, in 1762, Rousseau wrote The Social Contract. Rousseau wrote The Social Contract. Gonna repeat that. Rousseau wrote The Social Contract. In the social contract, he said that the government should be freely elected by the people. That there's no divine right. The right to rule is not handed down by God. That the people should elect their leaders. They should have choices of who they want as their leader, and they should be able to vote and elect the one that they want. Rousseau put great faith in the will of the people. Oops. The will of the people. And he said, I'm going to change because this is really important. Rousseau thought the good of the community as a whole should be placed above the good of the individual. What in the world does that mean, Mrs. Givens? I don't understand. Well, good thing you have Mrs. Givens here to explain this to you. So, what Rousseau is saying is that in society, if there's one really, really, really rich person and everybody else is pretty poor, then that's a bad society. What should happen is everyone should have just enough to be happy. That the good of everyone should be more important than the good of just one person. And I deeply believe this, that all of us should be healthy and fed. We should all have a house to live in. We should all have clothes to wear. All of us should be taken care of instead of just one really, really rich person and everybody else suffering. And there's just one more, oops, I just dropped my pen. There's one more quick little thing that's pretty important. So the Enlightenment slogan, was free and equal. This is what, like, if the Enlightenment Philosophes were a sports team, the cheerleaders would be out going, free and equal, free and equal, free and equal. That was their big thing. But the Enlightenment thinkers were white dudes. They were white men. And their big thing was free and equal men. Now, a woman named Mary Wollstonecraft. She started writing for newspapers and pamphlets, whatever, wherever someone would read her. And she started saying, hey now, this free and equal stuff, this should apply to women too. Free and equal, this should be for all of us, not just you. And her big thing that she really pushed for was education for both boys and girls. Because at this time, it was only the middle class and above that got education anyway, but boys went to school. Girls were only taught things like cooking and cleaning and how to be a good wife. They didn't go to school. And Mary Wollstonecraft said free and equal should be for everyone, and education should be for boys and girls. She was one of the first big names in women's rights, or in Europe. She was one of the first big names in women's rights and women equality, and saying that this Enlightenment slogan of free and equal, why does it only apply to men? Okay, one last thing. The Enlightenment period was also the beginning of the laissez-faire economy. Laissez-faire. Before the Enlightenment, Europe mostly used mercantilism. I'm giving you an assignment. Your assignment is to research laissez-faire, research mercantilism, and write me an essay on the difference between the two. Give me a brief little history of mercantilism, and then a brief little history of laissez-faire, and talk to me about why laissez-faire began. So I'm not giving you any size restriction on this. This can be 1 page. This can be 3 pages. This can be 457 pages. You are plenty old enough to know if you've answered the question. I want you to, or I didn't really ask a question. I want you to tell me about mercantilism. Tell me about how it started. Tell me how it worked. Like, what is mercantilism? And then I want you to talk to me about the switch. When things changed from mercantilism to laissez-faire, and then talk to me about what is laissez-faire and why the change. Why did they change from mercantilism to laissez-faire? And I'm gonna make this due on Friday. Due Friday. I don't know what date that is. I have to look in my, let me look in my calendar. Friday is the 11th. Due Friday the 11th. Okay? Sum up for me what mercantilism is. Sum up, and then like where it was used, when it was used, why it was used. Give me a good little report on mercantilism. And then when and why did governments switch and start using laissez-faire? What is laissez-faire? Why did they think it was better? All of that. Now, don't obsess over it too much. I don't need 1,000,001 questions. Mrs. Gibbons, what am I supposed to do? Just, I expect every single one of your essays is going to be a little bit different. I'm not looking for exactly perfect. You're gonna do just fine if you just do what I say. Tell me a bit about mercantilism. Tell me when they switched to laissez-faire and why, and tell me about laissez-faire, and you'll do just fine. Okay, thanks guys.